The lasagna was still bubbling when my husband leaned across the kitchen counter and said, quietly, so no one else could hear, "I think your brother-in-law has been lying to this family for a very long time." I set down the oven mitt. I didn't say anything. I just looked at him. He had that expression he gets sometimes. Not alarmed, not angry, just still. The way he gets when something doesn't add up and he's already 3 steps ahead of everyone else in the room. He's been a forensic fraud investigator with the CRA for 11 years. He doesn't say things like that casually. "What do you mean?" I asked. He glanced toward the living room, where I could hear my sister laughing at something and my parents talking over each other the way they always do, and my brother-in-law's voice carrying above everyone else the way it always does. "Not tonight," he said. "Let's just get through tonight." I nodded like that made sense. Like I could just serve lasagna and pass the garlic bread and listen to my brother-in-law tell the same story about his trading portfolio that he'd told at least 4 times in the past year and not think about what my husband had just said. We've been together for 8 years, married for 5. I know when he's worried about something, and I know when he's already decided it's serious. I carried the salad bowl to the table and tried to smile. My sister Vanessa and her husband Marcus had been together since they were 23. They met at a pub in Kelowna during a long weekend, got engaged 2 years later, married in a vineyard outside of town the following summer. My parents adored him. My dad used to clap him on the shoulder and call him the son I never had, which I tried not to take personally since I was standing right there. Marcus was charming the way certain people are charming, effortlessly and slightly too much. He always had a story. He always had a deal in the works. He talked about money the way some men talk about sports, with a kind of enthusiasm that made you feel like you were either missing something or not smart enough to understand it. Over the years, I'd heard about the investment property in Kelowna that was appreciating like crazy, the business partner in Calgary who was about to close something big, the TFSA he'd maxed out every year since he was 25. He said it with such confidence that nobody ever pushed back, least of all Vanessa, who tends to believe the people she loves, and I mean that as a compliment because she gets it from her mother. My husband, I'll call him by his role here, my husband, had been quietly skeptical of Marcus for at least 2 years. He never said it outright. He would just go a little quiet during Marcus's financial monologues or ask a follow-up question that Marcus would deflect with a laugh and a pivot. I asked him about it once, maybe a year before that dinner. He said, "I just notice things. It's my job." I said, "He's family." He looked at me in that way he has and said, "I know." The dinner that night was for my parents' anniversary, 38 years. My mom had wanted a small thing, just the family, just the house, just the lasagna she makes every year with the ricotta and the sweet Italian sausage that takes 3 hours because she insists on doing the sauce from scratch. My parents live in the same house in Abbotsford where Vanessa and I grew up, the same narrow hallway, the same creaky 3rd step, the same maple in the front yard that drops its keys into the Eva Strohs every fall, no matter how many times my dad cleans them out. Being there always makes me feel young in a way that's mostly good and occasionally unsettling. We'd driven out from Vancouver that morning just under an hour on a clear day, longer when there's rain or an accident on the Trans-Canada, which there usually is. My husband drove while I went through work emails and we talked about nothing in particular, a podcast we both half listened to, whether we needed to replace our water heater, whether my parents would mention grandchildren again, which we agreed they would, and they did, within the first 20 minutes. Marcus and Vanessa were already there when we arrived. Their kids, 2 of them, 6 and 8, absolutely feral with energy, were in the backyard with my dad, who was pretending to lose at some game involving a garden hose. My mom was in the kitchen with Vanessa, who was telling a story with her hands the way she always does, using up a lot of airspace. Marcus was in the living room watching the pregame with a beer. He stood up when we came in, gave me a hug, shook my husband's hand. "There he is," Marcus said, "the government man." He always said that. My husband worked for the Canada Revenue Agency. Marcus thought this was either very funny or slightly threatening. It was always hard to tell. My husband smiled and said, "Good to see you, Marcus." He meant it, or at least he hid the opposite well. Dinner was the way anniversary dinners in that house always are. Too loud, too warm, full of overlapping conversations and someone always getting up to refill something. My dad gave a toast that went on slightly too long and made my mom cry in the good way. The kids ate about 12% of their food and were eventually sent to watch a movie upstairs. Marcus was in good form. He was talking about a new opportunity, something involving short-term rentals in the Okanagan, a partnership with a guy he'd met at a conference in Toronto. He had a number in mind. A projected return. He was looking at my dad when he said it, and my dad was nodding in the way he nods when he's interested, but too polite to ask the hard questions. I watched my husband's face across the table. He was listening, not nodding. At some point, he asked very casually, "Who's the general partner on that?" Marcus glanced at him. A guy named Derek. I'd known him for years. Good track record. "Is it an exempt market offering?" A pause. Very brief. "It's a private arrangement." "Right," my husband said and went back to his lasagna. Vanessa changed the subject to the kids' school, and the moment passed and nobody else seemed to notice it. But I noticed. And I noticed the way Marcus laughed a little too hard at the next joke my dad made. We helped clean up. My mom washed, I dried, Vanessa put things away in the wrong places because she's been gone long enough to forget where everything lives, and we didn't correct her. My dad and Marcus were back in the living room. My husband was outside on the back porch, ostensibly getting some air. I found him there 20 minutes later, leaning on the railing with his phone in his hand. "Tell me," I said. He looked at me for a moment. Then he said, "The investment property in Kelowna, the one he's been talking about for 3 years." "What about it?" "I looked it up on the land title registry this afternoon, before dinner." I felt something go still inside me. And? It's not in his name. It's in a numbered company that was dissolved in 2021. I stared at him. The porch light was on and moths were hitting it, and somewhere inside the house I could hear my dad laughing at something. "He could have restructured," I said. "He could have," my husband said, "but the mortgage on the property defaulted in 2022. It's been listed with a court-appointed realtor since March." I sat down on the porch step. The night was cold the way October in the Fraser Valley is cold, damp, with a smell of wood smoke from somebody's fireplace down the street. "How long have you known?" I asked. I had a feeling for a while. I started checking publicly available records a few weeks ago. He sat down beside me. "The TFSA he talks about, the maxed out ones since he was 25. He's 39 now. That's 14 years of maximum contributions at current limits. We're talking close to $200,000 in room alone, not counting growth. But he's never held a job that would support that kind of savings history. At least not one I can find any trace of." People have varying incomes. They do, but he also declared bankruptcy in 2017. I turned to look at him. "It was discharged," he said, "so it's not on his credit report anymore, but the court records are public. Your family has no idea." I thought about all the dinners, all the stories, the investment property, the Calgary business partner, the conference in Toronto, my dad calling him the son he never had. "Vanessa," I said. "I know." "She doesn't know?" "I don't think so, but I'm not sure." We sat on that porch step for a long time. Inside, someone turned off the television. I could hear my mom's voice, and then my dad's voice, and then quiet. "What do I do?" I said. "That's up to you," he said. "I just needed you to know." I didn't sleep well that night. We stayed over. My parents have a guest room with a quilt my grandmother made and a window that rattles when the wind picks up, which it did, all night. I lay there listening to it and listening to my husband breathe and trying to figure out who I was protecting and who I was betraying depending on what I did next. Vanessa had moved away from home first. She was older by 3 years, and she'd gone to UBC Okanagan while I stayed closer and went to SFU. We were close in the way sisters are close when they don't compete. We overlapped more than we clashed, liked different things, needed different things. She was the one who organized, who remembered birthdays, who made sure our parents had someone coming over for the long weekends when I was too caught up in my own life to drive out. She was generous in ways I was still learning to be. She loved Marcus. Not in a naive way, I'd always thought. She wasn't someone who looked away from things. She'd ended a long relationship before Marcus because she caught the guy lying about something small, and she said she didn't believe that people lie small once. She had principles, which was why I couldn't decide if she knew, or if she'd be devastated to find out, or some complicated combination of both. At 2 in the morning, I turned over and whispered to my husband, "What exactly made you start looking?" "The conference in Toronto," he said. He wasn't asleep either. He said he met this Derek at a conference in Toronto last April. I happen to know the conference he was talking about. It's in my industry too, kind of adjacent. I know people who went. I asked around. Nobody had heard of any Derek connected to Okanagan short-term rentals. It could mean nothing, but it was the 4th or 5th time something he said didn't line up with something I knew to be true, so I started paying attention differently. "He's good at it," I said. "He's very good at it." I waited 2 weeks before I said anything to Vanessa. I'm not proud of that. I told myself I was gathering my thoughts, that I needed to be sure, that I didn't want to blow up my sister's marriage on the basis of public records that might have explanations I didn't understand. But the truth is, I was scared. Not of Marcus. I was scared of being wrong. And I was scared of being right. And I was scared of being right. And I was scared of what Vanessa's face would look like when I told her. We met for lunch in New Westminster, a place we'd started going to the year before. A Vietnamese spot near the SkyTrain where the Boon Bahubu Hugu was so good I'd thought about it while making a difficult phone call twice. We went there when we needed to talk without the family present, which is its own kind of language between sisters. I let her order first. I let her talk for a while about the kids, about a thing that had happened at Liam's school, about a book she was reading. She has a good laugh. Vanessa does. Sudden and a little too loud for the room, which I've always found reassuring. Then I said, "I need to tell you something, and I don't know how to say it well, so I'm just going to say it." She put down her spoon. I told her everything: the land title, the dissolved company, the defaulted mortgage, the bankruptcy. I told her as plainly as I could without editorializing, the way my husband had told me, just the facts laid out, you can draw your own lines. She was quiet for a long time. "How long has he known?" she asked. "He started checking a few weeks before Mom and Dad's anniversary dinner." "So at dinner," she stopped. "The question about the general partner." "Yes." She looked out the window at the SkyTrain platform. A train went by. Then she said, "I knew something was off. About the Kelowna property, last year I asked him to show me the mortgage statement so we could talk about our overall debt picture, and he said he'd get to it, and he never did. I let it go because I didn't want to be the kind of wife who doesn't trust her husband." "That's not the same as not trusting him." "No," she said. "It's not, but it felt that way." She cried a little. Not the way you cry when something breaks. More the way you cry when something you already half knew becomes real, and you can't unknow it anymore. I moved to the other side of the table, and she let me put my arm around her, and we stayed like that until the crying passed and the food got cold. "I need to talk to him," she said. "I know." "I need to see all of it, the records. Can your husband?" "Yes," I said. "He already put it together. He can walk you through it." She nodded. She straightened up. She has a way of collecting herself that I've always admired, something closing behind her eyes, some decision being made, and I saw it happen then. "Don't tell Mom and Dad yet," she said. I wasn't going to. I need to know what the truth is before anyone else does. The conversation between Vanessa and Marcus happened on a Thursday evening after the kids were in bed. She told me about it the next day on the phone in pieces. She'd sat him down at the kitchen table. She'd told him what she knew. She'd put printed copies of the land title search and the bankruptcy discharge record on the table between them because she is thorough even when she's heartbroken. He hadn't denied it. He'd sat there for a long moment, looking at the papers, and then he'd said, quietly, not dramatically, "I didn't want you to think I was a failure." She said the thing that made her angriest wasn't the lie itself. It was that she would have stayed. That if he had come to her in 2017 and said, "I made bad decisions and I'm in serious trouble," she would have sat at that same table and worked through it with him. She'd told him that. She said his face had done something complicated and he hadn't been able to speak for a while. "Did he know that?" I asked her. "Before? Did he know you would have stayed?" There was a long pause on the line. "I think," she said slowly, "that he didn't believe he deserved that kind of response. So he never gave me the chance to give it." They didn't separate. I want to be honest about that. It wasn't a clean narrative ending, the kind where the truth comes out and everyone realigns and justice is served. It was messier and more human than that. They went to a counselor together, a woman in Burnaby who my husband's colleague had recommended, and they went every other week for the better part of a year. There were hard months. There were conversations I wasn't part of and don't know the contents of. What I do know is that Marcus talked to my dad. Not the full story, not that first conversation, but enough. He told my dad that he'd been struggling financially for longer than he'd let on, that some of the things he'd said about investments over the years had been exaggerated, that he was sorry for the impression he'd given. My dad was quiet for a long time and then said, "I didn't need any of that, you know. I just needed you to be straight with me." Marcus couldn't say anything to that. My dad said he was quiet for so long that it started to feel like grief, and he didn't know whose grief it was. I've thought a lot about what would have happened if my husband hadn't said anything. If he'd kept his suspicions to himself, which he easily could have. It wasn't his family. It wasn't his responsibility. Nobody asked him to run searches on land title registries at 4 in the afternoon before a lasagna dinner. But he told me because he thought I deserved to know, and I told Vanessa because she deserved to know even more, and Vanessa told Marcus because she believed. And I think she was right that the only way through was through. The thing I keep coming back to is what Vanessa said on the phone that morning, that Marcus hadn't given her the chance to show up for him because he didn't believe she would. I think about how many times we tell lies to protect people from something when the real thing we're protecting is ourselves. From the vulnerability of being known. From the risk of being a disappointment and still being loved anyway. My husband is not a dramatic person. He doesn't tell stories about himself. He doesn't like conflict and he is careful, sometimes very careful, about what he shares and with whom. But he came and found me on that porch because he thought the truth mattered more than the alternative, and I think that might be the most quietly courageous thing I've seen a person do. My parents still don't know the full picture. I suspect they know more than they let on. Parents usually do. But we've never had the full conversation. Maybe we will someday. Maybe this is one of those things that lives in the family now. Something everyone is aware of without naming directly. Like the third step that creaks and the maple tree and the way dinner always runs an hour longer than anyone plans for. Marcus comes to family dinners. He's quieter than he used to be. He doesn't talk about investment opportunities or portfolio strategies. He helps my dad with the Evistros in the fall, which is something, and my dad seems to appreciate it, which is also something. Last Christmas, Vanessa and I were washing dishes the same way we always do. Her washing, me drying, things going back in the wrong places, and neither of us correcting each other. And she said, without looking up from the sink, "Thank you for telling me." "I was scared to," I said. "I know." She handed me a pan. That's what made it matter. I've sat with this story for over a year now, and the part I keep returning to isn't the land registry or the bankruptcy discharge or even the moment Marcus looked at those papers on the kitchen table and didn't deny anything. It's what Vanessa said on the phone the next morning, that he never gave her the chance to show up for him because he didn't believe she would. That's the part that stays with me. Because I think most of the lies we tell the people closest to us aren't really about them. They're about us. About the version of ourselves we're terrified to have witnessed. Marcus didn't lie to protect Vanessa from the truth. He lied because somewhere along the way he decided that the truth, the real one, the one with the failed company and the dissolved corporation and the bankruptcy at 32, made him someone who didn't deserve the family he had. So he built a different story, and he told it so many times it started to feel load-bearing. What I've come to understand is that honesty isn't just a moral position. It's a kind of courage that has to be practiced. The same way anything worth doing has to be practiced. My husband noticed something was wrong because he pays attention, not just to numbers and registries, but to the small moments where a story doesn't hold its shape. That's not cynicism, that's clarity. He asked one quiet question at a dinner table, and it set in motion the only thing that could have actually helped. And Vanessa, I watched my sister hold the truth in her hands, something genuinely painful and destabilizing, and decide to walk toward it instead of away from it. She didn't fall apart. She got quiet, and then she got purposeful. She printed the records. She sat her husband down. She told him what she knew and gave him the space to finally stop performing. That took something most people underestimate. Not just the willingness to know, but the strength to do something with what you find out. I think about the version of the story where nobody says anything, where my husband keeps his suspicions to himself because it isn't his business, where I stay quiet because I don't want to be the one who causes a problem, where Vanessa keeps not asking about the mortgage statement because asking felt like distrust. That version exists. A lot of families are living inside it right now, and in that version, nothing breaks but nothing heals either. Marcus keeps telling the stories. The distance between who he is and who everyone thinks he is keeps widening, and someday it collapses under its own weight. Except by then, the damage is so much worse. The version we got instead was harder in the short term. There were months I wasn't sure Vanessa and Marcus were going to make it. There were dinners that felt careful in a way dinners shouldn't feel. But Marcus sits with my dad now and helps clean out the Evistros, and there's something real in that, something that wasn't there before, because it doesn't need to be propped up by a story. I'm not sure I did everything right. I waited 2 weeks to tell my sister, which I'm still not entirely at peace with. But I told her, and she told him, and he told the truth, finally, to the people who deserved it. That's how it works, I think. Not all at once. Just one honest thing and then another, until the story you're living is actually yours.